Well, hi there. You're watching the Times Network with me, Meghna Deka. Well, are you looking for the best education opportunities, a global academic collaboration, or simply to upskill to keep up with the times? Well, the avenues for your contribution and collaboration with world leaders of education are many. But what is the most promising over the next 20 years? Well, that's the big question. Well, we are here to help. Well, the second episode of Australian Education Indian Potential Partnership for Global Success will be showcasing the world-class capabilities in Australian institutions in energy, food, digital health and ICT, and how they align with India's priority to strengthen the research and education ecosystem. In fact, joining us today, a very esteemed panel, Dr. Monica Kennedy, the Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner of the Australian Trade and Investment Commission. There's Professor Nick Klomp, the Vice Chancellor and President of CQ University in Australia, Professor Michael Wesley, DVC International, the University of Melbourne. There's also Mr. Swapan Johri, the President of APAC India and Middle East of HCL Technologies. Well, Dr. Kennedy, I'm going to be putting the first question across to you. So ever since we've seen the coronavirus, the pandemic which has happened, gripped the entire world, that pharma and digital health sector have been in news every day. In fact, what have been the changes that the Australian research and education sectors have experienced during this time of the pandemic?
I think, as we've seen right across the world, COVID accelerated change. And we saw in COVID a really strong interdisciplinary effort. You saw different disciplines coming together, from health, technology, demographers were working with pharmacologists. We saw a real strong interdisciplinary approach to what was a very, very complex problem. And I think this innovation that occurred as a result came because of that collaboration, because of the urgency and because of the complexity of the problem. And in Australia, we've got a really great reputation for developing innovative solutions where there are these kind of problems. And we've been able to demonstrate that capability in things as diverse from Wi-Fi to penicillin. We have really drawn on our internationalisation efforts to contribute to the diversity in the solution of these complex problems. And we've seen that in education too. Australian education institutions were really quick to go online, to put new focus on disciplines that were in demand as a result of COVID. And I think that we've been able to really benefit from this innovation, and the growing focus on internationalisation is one, I think, in which we have a common interest with India. And
that perhaps is the silver lining of a pandemic, isn't it? Professor Klomp, if I can come across to you now. So research lays the foundation of any world-class capabilities being established. So how can the research conducted in Australia in the prominent economy sectors such as energy, food, digital health and ICT help in making a sustainable world, and what are the opportunities for the India-Australia relationship in this progress?
Australia and India have so much in common. You wouldn't necessarily think that, because Australia is so small in terms of population. We're about 0.3% of the global population, but we bat above our weight when it comes to research. We contribute about 4% of the world's research, and at very high quality. The Australian government rates all our university research, and more than 2/3 of our research is at world standard, above world standard, or well above world standard. So we know we do well. But the beauty of working closely with India is because we have such similar commitments to, for example, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, but also similar problems. And you've mentioned some really interesting areas in food and agriculture, in energy, in digital health, because Australia, like India, have big population centres, but also lots of rural and remote areas, and we've got those challenges of providing that equity, access to resources and the support in a really big nation. And so I often think that Australia is tackling a lot of the research opportunities and challenges that India has. It's just that it's writ large in India. And so you won't be surprised to hear then that, for example, here at CQ University, about 25%, a quarter of all our research higher degree students students are from India, because they're really interested in the quality of our research, but they're tackling the similar problems that aren't just good for Australian research and good for answers in India, but actually these graduates go on and contribute to answers that are required for wicked problems around the world.
Absolutely, mutually beneficial, but also globally something that can put us on the path of progress and to counter a lot of this crisis. In fact, let me go across to Professor Wesley. This is something that Professor Klompt had also touched upon. Can you give us examples of the significant technology partnerships between the two countries?
There are many, including many that my own university is involved in. There are obviously information technology partnerships that are developing, particularly around data analytics. There are also growing partnerships, particularly in the biomedical research facilities between India and Australia, and a range of other partnerships. Vice-Chancellor Klomp and I were on a delegation led by the Australian Education Minister to India over 2 years ago, and what was really remarkable was the number and variety of different commercial and knowledge partnerships that different universities were talking about. It was wonderful to hear, and I'm sure that despite COVID, those sorts of partnerships have only increased in range and depth over time.
So, Mr. Jory, automation technologies can boost the speed of the manufacturing process and make it safer, more efficient, while also reducing some of the manpower costs. This prompts opportunities for societies as well as individuals. So, how is technology advancing in Australia, and how are the tech companies collaborating with universities for opportunities for students and also young professionals?
So I think there is a tremendous advancement in how technologies have been deployed in Australia over the many years. I mean, we in HCL have been in Australia for over 20 years, and we've seen tremendous advancement in deploying technologies such as AI, IoT, data. I mean, I'm talking about the more recent ones. What Australia has been limited by is talent availability. Local talent availability. And therefore, I think the primary area of collaboration at this point of time is skilling at scale. Example, HCL has a TechB program in partnership with a few leading universities. But there is also collaboration in providing students a real life experience, right? I think you have a program called Study Australia Industry Experience, which companies like us participate in. So I think that's the way the tech companies and the universities are really coming together.
In fact, since you're talking about Study Australia, Dr. Kennedy, perhaps you can explain to us what really is Study Australia, how is it going to help, and also give us a sense of how Australia has been using technology to enhance the entire educational experience as well.
There has been an enormous shift in education right across the world, and particularly in Australia. With COVID, when we weren't able to welcome students to our campuses, universities didn't sit idle. They spent a lot of energy, a lot of time working through opportunities to make the online experience so much richer for our students, but also thinking really hard about what it is about a face-to-face experience that could really be developed to make the face-to-face experience such a strong one when students finally came back to campus. We did a lot of work in the Australian government as well, actually, in looking after our international students who weren't able to travel to Australia. And Mr. Jory gave the example of the Study Australia Industry Experience program. And in this program, students were put together with international students, with domestic students, and real industry projects. And these virtual projects were ones in which students got to demonstrate their ability to be able to develop towards employment and towards their careers, but possibly more importantly to make really tight connections to industry representatives, to other students, and to colleagues and research partners and practice partners right across the world.
Well, in fact, Professor Klomp, because you mentioned that about a quarter of your university, CQ University, has Indian students there, can you give us a sense of what do they bring to the table as well when it comes to agglomeration of technology, of wits, of experience, and even cultures to your university?
Yeah, look, it's so important. You learn a lot from the curriculum, but you also learn a lot from the people that you're sitting beside in the classrooms, or you're sharing in assignments or other challenges. And I always say, when our students leave CQ University, they aren't just getting a degree, which has got to be world standard, and they should be proud of that, but they also have got all the references because they've met the experts in the area. They've had all this work integrated learning, so they've met industry leaders, and importantly, their friends, the people that they're having coffee with along the way, they thought they were just university friends, they're also graduating. They're going on to take their places, management and leadership positions around Australia, around India, around the world. So they've actually developed all of these professional contacts as well. And we often hear the saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Well, when you emerge from an international education like this, you've got contacts around the world. It is so empowering for our graduates.
Well, absolutely. And this is going to be scripting. And we're not just talking about this year, the next 20 years of educational collaboration between the two countries. Well, we need to slip into a short break. But on the other side, you don't want to miss it. We're going to be discussing the emerging opportunities for closer engagement between the Indian and Australian organizations as well. So stay tuned for that. Well, welcome back. You're watching Australian Education, Indian Potential Partnership for Global Success on Times Network. Now, let's get you a glimpse of the emerging opportunities for closer engagement between the Indian and Australian organizations in academia, in corporate and even government sectors, because that's very crucial as well in the way forward. So, Dr. Kennedy, if I can come to you, let's flip the discussion a little bit. Well, Australia has been attracting thousands of students every year, but do you think that any other model can be developed under which all the Indians can perhaps benefit from the capabilities in your universities as well as research institutions?
I do think that there's real opportunity. Of course, Australia will always be a fabulous destination for an education experience. You know, we have world-leading institutions, we have a fabulous, safe and diverse and very welcoming community, and it's a beautiful place to live. So that will always be an important part of the study experience for many students. But for many students too, they're thinking about the opportunity for blended modes, so different ways of learning. COVID certainly moved us forward a long way in understanding the benefits of an online education and what it can provide. And as we spend more time building in the relationship, particularly between institutions in Australia and in India, we're seeing that there's real opportunities for blending the online and the face-to-face delivery, both here in India and then in India and Australia. We're seeing many people think about how they can take some learning from a good quality Indian institution and have that contribute to a qualification back in Australia as well. And so as time goes on and as our nations get closer, the students are getting better visibility of the different ways that we can work together. We both, Australia and India, have institutions of exceptional quality. And these institutions, more and more, are holding hands, working together in their research, of course, but also in education collaborations.
So, Professor Klomp, if I can come to you now, Indian students who are choosing to study abroad isn't a new trend, as we were just discussing. In fact, in the earlier episode of this show, we had Professor Wesley come out and say that in his research of his University of Melbourne, they found the records went back all the way to 1930s when the relationship had begun, the first few Indian students who had come to the university. So in the context of 2022, what are the reasons that Indian students would choose to study in Australia? What are the opportunities which are going to be available to them through the NEP as well for Australian universities and institutions to boost the education relationship between the two nations?
two bits to that answer. The first one is for the students that want to study in Australia, as Dr. Kennedy mentioned. Well, Australia has got a very, very good tertiary education system. You can't be called a university in Australia if you're not meeting the Australian federal government standards. So they're very, very strict. But besides that, then industry and the professional organisations apply their accreditation requirements on our courses as well. So for Australian qualifications are very highly regarded and recognised around the world. And we've been doing this for a long time. So a student coming to Australia can expect really great student support, a really good relevant curriculum. But I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and COVID has added a spin to it in two ways. One, students need to get a really great return on their investment. Let's face it, if you're coming all the way to Australia, halfway around the world, and it costs a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of effort from not just that student, but perhaps their family and extended family. So we in Australia really recognise that, and the graduate employment rates in Australia are very, very solid. For example, at CQ University, our undergraduate employment rate, which means whether they've got a job within 4 months of graduating, is 89%. Postgrad, 93%. So you're very likely to get a high return on all of your investment money and time and effort in your studies. So that's important. Just by the way, CQ University is putting its money where its mouth is, and we even have what's called a graduate guarantee. So if you graduate from an undergraduate degree and you don't have a job within 6 months in your discipline, we will give you a free postgraduate course. That's how serious we are, because we know that our students just walk into jobs. So that's one aspect of it. But then the Indian government's National Education Plan has made us think more closely about how we can work with India. And there's things like internationalisation at home in that plan. So can we share curriculum? Can we work more closely on some of the systems that we've developed in Australia? Because we face some of the same challenges of how do you distribute this education across, not just in the cities, but in rural areas as well. And that brings us to what Dr. Kennedy has already mentioned, which is the open learning, online, mixed mode higher education. I think the collaborations between Australia and India, they're going to be very, very exciting. I think we're just going to go from strength to strength in that collaboration.
Well, it already is, isn't it? In fact, Professor Wesley, do you think that Australia and India have the optimum quantum of translational research capabilities as well to develop this breakthrough products for people worldwide?
I'm not sure we've got anywhere near the potential of collaboration between Australia and India yet. I think that we are only just scratching the surface, and that as the links between our two countries become ever closer, as our education and research linkages become ever closer, we will see an exponential growth in that sort of collaboration occurring to the mutual benefit of both countries.
So, Mr. Johri, how are Australia's research capabilities creating value for industry?
I think Meghna, Dr. Kennedy talked about we should have an example of what we call as a foundational technology, Wi-Fi, the long-range global benefits of such foundational work is absolutely so well known, right? I think it's difficult to estimate what that value is. I would probably talk a little more about what I would call as, how do you deploy technology, right? I mean, so you create a new technology, but then to make it work, to make it useful for specific areas, or specific industries is another game. I mean, that also needs a lot of research and depth. And if you look at Australia's fabric in research, I think both Vice Chancellor Trump and Professor Wesley spoke about it, right? I think, there is a tremendous amount of work that they do especially let's look at agriculture, environment, natural resources, and now sports. I think, so how do you take these technologies and make them work for these verticals? And by the way, these verticals happen to be also very high priority from both an India and Australia perspective, just a point to bring out over there. So I think the collaboration in getting these technologies to work in specific industries is where the real value comes in, and that's where even tech companies or other industry companies, can really leverage the benefit. I would tend to think of this and coin a term here is, we need to talk really about what could be a research continuum, right, rather than just an education continuum. So if you do a research continuum, I think the amount of value that can be generated is going to be humongous.
That's a very relevant point that you've made. And again, for the viewers who are tuned into the first episode of the show as well, that's exactly what Professor Rao had mentioned, that especially in agricultural technology, India really requires it with a large agricultural population in India, and Australia being one of the world leaders when it comes to agricultural technology. Perhaps that's one of the sectors that we really need to work together for mutual benefit as well. So, Dr. Kennedy, would it be right to say now, going by the discussion, that there is no sector with perhaps greater promise for Australia and India than research and education?
Well, certainly we would agree with you. And in Australia, our Australia-India economic strategy has as its flagship sector education and research, because it is fundamental to everything that we do. Every sector in our economy and every part of our nation's connections here, from health to energy, rely upon education and research collaboration for growth. So we talked earlier about how collaboration prompts innovation and how internationalisation feeds this diversity for collaboration to resolve complex problems. So yes, the opportunity in education and research for collaboration between our institutions is very real, and as we go forward using Mr. Jyoti's words, I think, in holding hands in education and research, working together on a research continuum, I think you see education and research are the opportunity for Australia and India to work together. There's an opportunity for real partnership in prosperity between our nations through education and research.
So, a partnership for prosperity. Couldn't have put it better. Thank you so much for joining us here on the show, Dr. Kennedy, Professor Klump, of course, Professor Wesley and Mr. Johri. It was a pleasure to have this very insightful discussion. Well, here on Times Network, we give our viewers information which is accurate and it's comprehensive. This will help you make an informed decision. And I hope that the show did just that. Thank you so much for watching.